thinking of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while, we're sure to find happiness, and I guess all those things you've always pined for. Gee, I'd like to see you looking swell, baby. Bridman bracelets Woolworth doesn't sell, baby. Till that lucky day, you know darn well, baby, I can't give you anything but love. One more time. Welcome back to JUKEBOX Radio. That was I Can't Give You Anything But Love, Baby, made popular by the gem of the Harlem Renaissance, the songstress Adelaide Hall. This is Stride Piano, part the first. Why part one? Why not just do it all? Well, I went online to YouTube and I looked at what was out there in terms of stride piano tutorials, and there's a lot, and I thought to myself, well, maybe I just shouldn't do anything because there's a lot out there already. But then I realized none of those videos gave context, and context is very important when you're learning any form of art or music. If I were your, let's say, painting teacher, and I gave you a paint by numbers experience where you painted and in the end you ended up with a painting that was a copy of an Impressionist painting, would you say that I had taught you Impressionism? No, of course not. Of course not. Impressionism, well, you know, it was in France and it was in the late 1800s and people were painting outdoors and there was light and Cassatt and Monet and Manet and they were bucking the salons and so same thing. If you learn just a little bit of how to, or a lot of how to even on YouTube, that's great. But context is very important, especially with music like this that really is derived from people being enslaved and coming over to this country and making this sort of hybrid. I mean, it's just insulting not to know the context, right? It's downright colonial. We're not going to do that. All right, I'm off my soapbox. So, stride piano. Well, to learn about stride piano, we've got to learn a little bit about ragtime, and we've got to learn a little bit about the milieu of music in America in the 1800s. And to learn about that, and of course I'm talking about African-American music and African music, we have to go back to learning about polyrhythms that are from Western Africa, and so on into the mists of time. Just as an aside, when I say something like polyrhythms from Western Africa, that assumes that Western Africa even is monolithic. But of course, we can focus the microscope more and more and see that that there's lots of different cultures and areas and ways of doing things. We're going to try to take the broad perspective, but please know that you can investigate this in very minute detail as well. Well, as we know, the first enslaved people were brought to the English colonies in 1619, and thus began the horrible transgression. However, we are going to fast forward a little bit, but we're always going to keep this in mind. We're going to fast forward a little bit to Congo Square in New Orleans. Congo Square in New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz, really, is where people who were enslaved gathered on Sundays when they had the day off, and they would play drums, and there would be African dances going on, and there were also, New Orleans was a nexus because boats were coming in with people from the Caribbean and South America as well. And one thing that emerged from this was this infusion of polyrhythms into the consciousness of the country. And these polyrhythms, well, what's a polyrhythm? It's like a bar of music, right? But it's got two different rhythms going on at the same time. You don't have it too much in Western music back then. You see a little bit in maybe Chopin, Liszt at some point. Some people are catching on, but really not much, if at all. So, I'd like to demonstrate it. I remember days past when my 14-year-old son and I would sit around demonstrating polyrhythms. Oh, if only that could happen again. All right, just come here.
Yeah. And it's gonna be like,
Yeah,
right.
You're doing 1, 2. Yeah, that's it. Okay, are we ready?
Yeah.
I'll talk about it a little bit. All right, this is my son Yasha, and he's got a djembe. It's an African drum. Can you hold it up? All right, there it is. And he's going to play a polyrhythm. Now, a polyrhythm, it's two rhythms at the same time. It's not something we have much in the West. In the West, we have harmonies and melodies going on at the same time and on top of each other, but not usually rhythms. So go ahead and start playing it, and we'll talk about it. So he's got a 3 and a 2 going at the same time. In this hand, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. In this hand, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Yasha. I think that's all I need. You are dismissed. I appreciate that. Thank you, Yasha.
no problem.
So, what's the point of showing you these polyrhythms that came from Western Africa? Well, just to tell you that polyrhythms, they start to, they emphasize beats in a measure that in Western music just aren't emphasized. And that leads to syncopation. What is syncopation? Well, syncopation is, it's a little bit different than polyrhythm, but it's related. It's where there are beats, the and beats, rather than the 1 and 3 or 2 and 4 even. My goodness. Let me just show you rather than try to tell you. So here's a song you might know from Sesame Street. And here it is without syncopation. All right, here's with syncopation. Ooh, exciting. Now, even though that is by Georges Bizet, that is a South American rhythm and derived, again, right from Western Africa, or from Africa even. And the syncopation means, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It's on the and. All right, here's another example. Here's another example. My goodness, I've got Scott Joplin right here, and that's where we're leading. How about the beginning of the Maple Leaf Rag? See that? if you're not trained in music, it still might be a little hard to understand. How about I sing a song? Gonna lay down, without syncopation. Gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, with syncopation. Gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside. The emphasized beats come not where you'd expect them. So that's what syncopation is. And there was syncopation in Western music, but we're getting to Scott Joplin, the king of ragtime. Let me do a little sidebar, because he was born in 1868. So we've gone from Congo Square in the early 1800s in New Orleans to 1868. A lot has happened. So the milieu of African-American music at that time was blues, right? We had the blues scale and blues notes. You can hear about that in some of my other videos. We had spirituals. We had field hollers. There were dances, right? There was the banjo. That was directly came right over from Western Africa. The banjo. That instrument was made from a gourd-like instrument. I'm gonna show you banjo in just a second. There it is. Well, and and something very, very shameful as well. Minstrel shows. So minstrel shows were completely racist depictions of life in plantations. It was mostly white minstrel shows, although there were black ones as well. White people would put on blackface. It's really disgusting and shameful. We didn't have recordings. Unfortunately, maybe we know a little bit about African American music at that time from minstrel shows, because that was, they were taking the sources and converting it to their own means. It's hard to say. I kind of wonder if it's like in grade school when my white math teacher would like make up a rap. But not only cringy, but super racist. Okay, so interestingly enough, and then I'll end the sidebar, this stuff still comes up, and I don't mean blackface in the media. I mean, that stuff's obvious, but in much more subtle ways, including, I think of myself as being pretty aware of things. The original song that I was going to play for this video was called Dinah. And I've heard it recorded and sung by Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet and, lots of black artists and white artists too. And it's got a fun jocular. So when I looked at the words though, and I've played it in bands and stuff, when I looked at the words, there's one part that says, "with her Dixie eyes blazing," and that kind of tipped me off. And I was like, let me look up the song. Well, it turns out this song, written in the 20s, made its debut. And Dinah, I didn't know this, and I've been working on the railroad. Also, this intersects here. Dinah was the minstrel show word for a woman who was sort of this Aunt Jemima character. So that's messed up. And Dinah, the song, premiered at, wait for it, New York's Plantation Club. So obviously that was scrapped. My only point in saying all that was that that some of the stuff still comes up today, and it's just right under the surface. Kids are learning. I've been working on the railroad. Well, that's the same Dinah in that song. So let's go to Scott Joplin, though. Scott Joplin was a man born in 1868 in Texas, and he roamed around and played music, but he learned piano from a German fellow, and he learned all the Western, the canon, the suites, the minuets, the operas, and he loved it. At that time, the music of John Philip Sousa was ascendant, right? That's the marching music. Dun 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 dun. Okay. So what Joplin did was he made this perfect melding of syncopated music in the right hand of his own invention, with this march rhythm in the left hand. Did I want to say anything else about that? No, only that I know about Joplin because in the 1970s there was a huge revival from the movie The Sting, and I heard a lot of that music growing up. Okay, so this syncopated music, again there was syncopated music, but it was here and there. The Joplin syncopation, ragtime was to that as like a mazurka would be to Chopin. Let's take you through a song all the way up through stride. To give you an example, I'm gonna play a song. This is Red River Valley, and it's a song my father liked. So just to continue about Joplin, born in 1868, had this wonderful hybrid of Western European music and then syncopated music that really just welled up from his own culture, and was known as the King of Ragtime. Published in 1899 his most famous piece, The Maple Leaf Rag. Okay, so now you have some historical context for him. Let's look at styles. I'm going to play this song very straight. It's not a stride song. It's not a ragtime song. It's an old cowboy song. My father liked it, but it'll give us a good example. It's called Red River Valley, and it goes like this. This is as straight as I can play it. Listen to that left hand. March, march. All right. Let's start with this banjo. Now this is a Turkish banjo, but it's tuned to American style, and it'll work for these purposes. So what I'm going to do, because the banjo, as I said, was brought over from Western Africa, so I'm going to play it, and I'm going to try to have a polyrhythm sort of going at the same time, or at least some syncopation. So instead of "From this valley they say you are going," no, I'm going to have and it's fretless, which means that you can get a lot of blues notes and stuff that were in the African American milieu. All right, let me just play it. W.C. Handy, another luminary in this history, black man who called himself the father of the blues. But anyway, he saw a man playing banjo, and he described it, and the man was using a knife sort of with a slide, and he had never seen anything like that. So that's the first description of that we hear. Anyway, I was playing it with a broken off bottle. If you do this, use a paper bag and then file it down so it's smooth. Okay. So now let's rag it, right? Remember the straight version was... Let's play it as Joplin might have written it. And there's some specific things that he does as well. He does lots of thirds. He does diminished chords and sixes. I'll make up a little introduction. He often did that. Okay, let's see. Here's syncopation. Left hand going to be straight up, right hand syncopation. Let's have another go. That's probably where Joplin would go after that. But you see, instead of there's a things happened on the offbeat, and I swung it a little bit too in the left hand. All right. Let's do Jelly Roll Morton. Who's Jelly Roll Morton? He was sort of a bridge between ragtime and stride. He was from New Orleans, and in his playing, you'll hear it'll be more orchestral. You'll hear the sounds of the different sounds of the band, and you'll see a little bit of development in the left hand. The Carmen rhythm. You get the idea. Let's do a little detour. I didn't even talk about this, but let's do a little boogie woogie. I use the blues scale. Let's do a little church music. Now we're up to stride piano. What happens in stride piano? Well, the left hand gets a lot more developed, and this is a nexus of high art. I'm going to focus in on three musicians that you'll hear about, but these guys were classically trained, and they brought everything they had to the fore, and they created stride piano. So here we go. Lots more going on in the left hand, and the right hand is gonna, I will attempt to be virtuosic, but when these guys did it, it really was, and it swings. And here's some Fats Waller type interpolations. All right. So what's stride piano all about? Well, it's, as I said, it was pioneered by three guys: James P. Johnson, Fats Waller, Willie the Lion Smith. There are other people, of course, but it was sort of the apex pose of all of this, right? The coming together of the Western tradition, the African American tradition in piano, polyrhythms, complexity, left hand. It pushed the piano as far as it could go. And and these guys were classically trained. James P. Johnson, his teacher, was a student of Brahms, right? And all this happened. So Joplin, to give you the timeline, born in 1868, died in 1917. This stride piano flowered in Harlem during the 1920s. And that, of course, was the time of the Harlem Renaissance, right? Art and music and literature flowering. Langston Hughes, Norazil Hurston, Duke Ellington, Adelaide Hall, who I mentioned, the singer, and the stride pianists. So James P. Johnson and Willie the Lion Smith were fast friends, and Fats Waller, he came along too and became friends with them. These guys grew up in Jersey and New York. Willie the Lion Smith, to me, is one of the most interesting fellows. He was, now these are all black men, I assume you know that, but just to say. So Willie the Lion Smith was born. His mother was a black woman and his father was a white man, Jewish man. His father died soon after he was born, and he was raised by his stepfather. Very working class background. His mother would have him go to the slaughterhouse where his stepfather worked to bring the fella home, make sure he didn't stop for too many drinks along the way. But what's so interesting to me about Willie the Lion Smith is he had this whole other Jewish thing going on. So he spoke Yiddish, he got a bar mitzvah, and so you see pictures of this black man with a cigar and a derby at the piano, but he would speak Yiddish to the audiences too. He really was a lion. And to give you an idea of what things were like then, so these guys were, again, extending the ragtime tradition, but they would have these cutting contests. So picture yourself maybe at a rent party in Harlem or at a club. These guys, when they were working, would play like 8 or 9 hours a night. And really, if you got up and left the piano, some other pianist might come and get your job. So these guys were working all of this out on the bandstand. And so imagine yourself in one of these parties. Now, this is eminently danceable music, as is ragtime. So everybody's dancing and having a good time, and drinking and partying and smoking and whatever. Well, these guys would go up against each other in contests. They were called cutting contests, to see who could best one another. They were like rap battles, right? They weren't. I have a friend out here, Robin Jackson, and he runs something lovely called the Songwriter Soiree, and everybody gathers around and plays their original songs for each other, and people give lovely feedback, and it's very West Coast, and it's a very beautiful thing, and I'm sure a lot of people feel nurtured by it. Well, these cutting contests were nothing like that. Willie the Lion Smith would walk up to people playing and say, "Hey, what's the matter? Is your left hand crippled or something?" I mean, he was a character, and he was the best of the best. Jelly Roll Morton, who I had mentioned earlier, he came up and tried his hand at sort of these cutting contests. He was a little nervous, and he should have been. He slunk away. I mean, and this is a guy who pioneered a whole bunch of music, and he called himself the father of jazz. No one person is the father of jazz, but I mean, lots of credit to Jelly Roll Morton. He slunk away, and then years later, when Willie the Smith would recall him, he'd say, oh, you mean old One Hand? Oh, cruel and cutting and biting, but funny and expansive. And in fact, later, I think he softened up a bit. Now he was friends with Duke Ellington, U.B. Blake, that's another pianist I should mention. But he had lots of students, including Thelonious Monk, my favorite pianist. So the stride piano, again, was the apex of all of this coming together. We had, just to review, we had the polyrhythms, which had infused syncopation into the culture. We had banjo playing, field hollers, spirituals. Unfortunately, we had minstrel shows. Then we had ragtime, and that pianistic tradition was extended into stride by these people. Stride with its left hand and its right hand, and virtuosity, and its stride. That's why it's called stride. The piano sort of walking up and down, striding around. There's swing to it for sure. And I'll give you the how-tos next week, but I wanted to have context. After stride, this happens in music. It became less popular. There was actually more space in piano music after that. Maybe people thought it was too busy, or just this is how trends happen. They explode, and then people's ears get tired of it. So after stride, then came Earl Father Hines, and then the piano sort of was imitating horn lines more, and there was more sparseness in that. That stride was not always happening. As I mentioned, these guys though had far-reaching influence to this day, and one of my favorite pianists, or my favorite pianist, is Thelonious Monk. And so I'm going to play a little bit of his Ruby, My Dear, and you'll hear that stride influence. So you hear that da 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 da. I don't know. I hear it. And once your ear gets more attuned to these things, you'll hear it too. Well, I hope that's enough context for you. I'm Eric Stern. This has been Jukebox Radio, Stride Piano, part the first. Next week, Stride Piano, part 2, with the how-tos. But I will make sure to tell all those people watching part 2 that you got to watch part 1 first, because we can't just pick and choose, right? We got to know the history. All right, Jukebox Radio, Eric Stern. Tip me down there if you want. If you don't want, that's okay too. But I'll just put a link just in case, and I'll play myself out.
Jukebox Radio was recorded on tape before a live studio audience of a couch, a skateboard, and a 14-year-old boy doing his schoolwork.